have your book, and Minda actually was nice enough and head over a little early, and they're all signed.
It's on one of the first few pages. I was trying to run quickly.
And you're gonna have to do mine afterwards because I had it early and it had notes all over it, so I don't want a new one. I want mine. So Mindy did a great introduction of Minda. And, in addition to the book she just wrote, which we're going to dive into now, she also wrote the memo Right Within and You Are More Than Magic. And as Mendy said, has actually directed, produced, and written movies. So multiple genres here. In her prior life, because we are all multi-hyphenated now, right? She has been one of Business Insider's 100 People Transforming Businesses, and has worked with lots of companies you've all heard of: Nike, Google, Best Buy, JP Morgan Chase, United Nations. And she really helps define leadership and workplace culture. And because we're multi-hyphenated, she's also a professor at NYU. So welcome.
Thank you very much.
So one of the things that struck me when I first read this, which I love that resonates so well, is your personal mission statement is making the workplace work for everyone. Anybody remember hearing that earlier today, what we do at CWIB? I wanted to start out, Minda. What inspired you to develop the concept of trust languages for the workplace? Why was it so urgent that you felt you needed to write this book?
Yeah, well, again, thank you, Lisa, and to your colleagues for having me. Honored to be here with all of you today. Yeah, actually, I got the idea for the trust languages maybe about 3.5, 4 years ago. I woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and was on my way to the bathroom, and all of a sudden I hear this idea in my head or voice in my head, trust languages, and I wrote it in my notes. And I'm like, oh, I wonder what that is. And then over time, I'd come back to it, and I'd be at various companies, and people would ask me or tell me that they don't trust someone, fill in the blank, right? Their manager, HR, a colleague, and I started to ask the question, well, what's underneath the reason why you don't trust? And if they knew this was the reason, would that enhance the relationship? So there's something that you need that they're not aware of. I build trust different, you build trust different, and it made me think about, oh, we have a trust language. And so that was kind of the impetus. And it's funny because this book came out a couple of months ago, but I pitched this book almost 3 years ago. So for it to sit at the intersection of where we are today is really interesting. So timing, I think, is everything too.
Right. Love it. I mean, it's so true. And I love how you came upon that. And I love the concept of love languages. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. As I tell my family, my love language is spreadsheets. So in knowing that, I'm sure it's all of your love languages as well, right? I'm a finance professor. And so I was curious to see what my trust language is. And there's some great exercises in this book. We're actually CWIB team doing this next week or right after Thanksgiving to find all of ours. And so can you give us a brief overview of the 7 trust languages and why they're so fundamental to workplace relationships? Spreadsheets is not one of them. Spoiler.
No. But what I found, Lisa, is that again, people were saying they didn't trust something or they didn't trust someone. And what they were saying was they needed more of something. So it was less of a trust issue and more of a communication crisis. When trust is eroded, we don't have the words to be able to bring it back on the tracks, right? Or we sweep it under the rug and now we're all side-eyeing that person and they don't know why. Right? So I don't think that any of us show up to work intentionally and say, I want to erode trust with you, Lisa. I don't think we're that cynical, but through our behaviors, through our words, through our emails, our actions, we're moving so fast that sometimes we erode trust with people, right? We all do it. And so after all these years of conversations, the 7 trust languages, you're going to hear them. You'll think about trust from your perspective. You might have a primary trust language, a secondary trust language, and a tertiary. But I also want you to think about the people that you work with, and they might have a trust language as well. So we'll go through it really quick. Transparency. I don't know if anybody values clarity and honesty, but that is one trust language. Maybe it's not that you don't trust someone, you just need a little more clarity. You need a little more honesty. So we're naming what we don't have, what's eroding the trust. Sensitivity. That's being mindful of our behaviors and our actions. So I'm not going to say the joke that is only funny to me, because if I say that joke, especially in certain climates, it's very polarizing, and that might erode trust that's already hanging on by a thread, right? Security, not just psychological safety, but intellectual safety, physical safety. If I give my idea in a meeting, do I trust that someone's not going to run off with it on their own? I don't think that we often think about that, but that erodes trust, right? Um, Feedback. Everybody, we talk about feedback being a gift, but sometimes we get gifts we don't like, right? And so feedback can feel like criticism, it can feel like micromanagement. So meaningful and consistent insight. And also with feedback, creating a loop, because I think sometimes with our power dynamics, there's only one person giving the feedback, right? And there's no room for a loop. But when you think about trust languages too, think about when you give feedback or you receive it, how you respond to that feedback is also going to enhance trust or erode trust. Do we say, nobody's ever told me that before? I never heard that before. Do we, get defensive? That's also going to enhance or erode the relationship. Follow through. Who likes people who keep their word, right? Maybe you work with people who they always say yes to everything, but they can never close the loop, right? They've said yes to everything, but miss all the deadlines. And it's not that, and you say to yourself, I don't trust this person, and they just keep saying yes to the things, right? But follow through is also saying when you can't follow through, right? Don't leave me on workplace ghost. Don't leave me on workplace read. Like, don't run away from me when you see me in the hallway because you were supposed to give me something a little bit ago. Let's follow through. And when we can't, let's do that. Demonstration. That's the show and the tell, right? It's the do our behaviors align with our values? If I tell you that promoting women is important at the company that I work for, but the last 5 hires that you've seen have been men, that's not demonstrating to you that this is an environment in which I can trust that there's a place for me at the table. And then I think the 7th is acknowledgement, being seen and valued for your work. Sometimes it's not that you don't trust your manager, it's that they just haven't acknowledged you for your work and you're craving, or somebody on your team is craving. You don't need that. Your love language, your trust language is leave me alone, pay me equitably, right? Somebody on your team needs you to say, job well done. If it wasn't for that report that you did in Q3, I don't know where we'd be in Q4. That's something that each of us can do right now, right? Because in this climate, we may not be able to give bonuses. We may not be able to give increases, but we can give job well done.
No, I love that. And it reminds me so much. And it always comes back to it's relationships, right?
Yes.
And we all hear things and we all experience things differently. And our perception is our reality. And while you might have one trust language, I might have another. And so you're saying something, and if somebody said that to you, you'd be like, absolutely. But maybe I don't respond that way. I think of it a lot like parenting too. I have one carrot that responds really well to the stick, and one that responds to the carrot. And so it's hard, and I am one way and not the other. So I have to adjust as well. And I think that's really important, that we have to adjust to the folks on our team and who we're leading and everything else. Not that they're our children, but it's a relationship, right? And so, I alluded to this before, but how do you help leaders, managers, other individuals identify their trust languages? What are some exercises or examples that you have in the book that everybody's going to get to experience?
Yeah, so definitely read the book, because there's assessments in there, but you probably heard something that I said and you're like, you know what, I need more of that right now. And so basically what I'd say is to first remind us all that we're leaders even without a title, right? And that trust can be there at 9 a.m. in the morning. Somebody does something or says something and it can be gone by 9:07, right? How do we get back on the tracks? And so first of all, trust is a global language, right? And so people in Tokyo want trust, people in at Rutgers want trust, people in Los Angeles want trust. So it's important that we understand you may never know what it's like to be a woman of color, but you know what it feels like when trust is present, and you know when it's gone. And again, trust isn't just let me do a trust fall and Lisa catches me and we sing our favorite Taylor Swift songs, right? That's not trust. It could be, right? But it's also trust is good for the bottom line. When trust is present, we're 21% more productive. There's 50% more retention. We're 74% less anxious. And so that's good for the business. I don't know about you, but when I'm anxious and worried and nobody's being transparent at work, I don't do my best work. it's really hard to focus, right? I get it done, but what if we took away some of that ambiguity? So I think it's important for leaders to remember that trust is part of performance, right? So first of all, and then second of all, you may not know, everybody hasn't read the book yet, so you may not know what your trust language is yet. You may not know the people that you work with, but one question each of us can ask with the people that we work with: what does trust look like for you? I want to make sure that we have the best working relationship, and I want to know what that looks like. They're going to tell you one or two or three of those 7 things. They may not know it's transparency, but they're going to say something to you that signals that, oh, if I give Minda a little bit more of acknowledgement or a little bit more feedback, in the feedback that enhances and provides room for growth, that's going to be a point for her. She's going to trust me, right? I'm demonstrating that. And so I think if we ask that question to our direct reports, to the people that manage us, that's a way for us to understand, because again, we all want the same thing. We want to be able to be productive in the workplace, do our best work, and have harmonious relationships, right? Because we're going to spend 90,000 hours of our lives at work. Why would we expect trust in our platonic relationships, in our romantic relationships, and not expect it at a place that we're going to be for a good portion of our? I know this is very sobering. You need one of these drinks behind you, but it's but it's this point
5 o'clock
is, Lisa,
somewhere.
we can solve this. This is something we can all solve. It's behavior modifications.
No, I love that, and it's so true, what you're saying, and resonates so deeply. And I'm really excited for you all to read the book and learn some of these frameworks that we can use. Now, at CWIB, the Center for Women in Business, we've done a lot of work on the value that caregiving employees bring to the workplace. I'm looking, I don't know where Kate's sitting, and Crystal. Um, we've done a lot of work on this, and we identified 18 skills that caregivers actually bring to the workplace: humanity, empathy, cognitivity. Have you found in your work any connection with increased levels of trust from and with employees who are also caregivers, parents, kids, disabled relatives? Have you seen any connection there?
Absolutely, because so two trust languages that kind of speak to this are sensitivity, right? Being empathetic. So if, for example, if I'm on a Zoom call and I have my camera off, and my manager sees that I have my camera off, instead of them approaching me and saying, Minda, can't believe you don't have your camera on, you must be in Fiji working, and you're not doing your work, because that's not going to enhance the relationship. But being sensitive to say, Minda, you normally have your camera on, and I'm wondering, is everything okay? I wanted to check in with you, right? And then I feel the second trust language, security, to be able to tell you that I've been caretaking for my grandfather who has dementia, and he ran across the background, so I had to cut the camera off. I'm going to feel safe, right? And that's what we want. We want people to be empathetic. We want people, I also, it's a third language, I get to be transparent, right? About what's going on. I don't have to lie. I don't have to whatever, right? And we want those spaces. And I think that that's very important when it comes to caretaking, parental leave, so trust is at the core of everything we do. There's no future of work without trust.
No, I totally agree with that. The camera thing is always a hot button, and I think it's very generational. And so during COVID, I remember, my students didn't, and it's hard to teach online, and it's hard to take classes online. And my students didn't want their cameras on. And so I had to tell them, especially at the beginning, I was like, unless there's an issue, can you please, please, please turn on your camera, because I'm sick of looking at the people in my house. And so I was being transparent. I was trying to be funny, but I actually had pretty good compliance.
Well, I think that's important too, because when speaking, so that's important too for those who we report into or that
Yeah.
we're learning from. If you know that their language is part of their trust language is seeing your face or having you comment in the chat, that's where we show up, right? Because we know that you trust when you see me every now and then. If you never see me, then I know that you're wondering what I'm doing. And I think that's part of it. We're asking for the humanity. If you need this to build trust, then there's something that I need, and trust begets trust.
Right, absolutely. And I made them feel secure, because I said, I don't care how you look. I don't care if you're in bed. You do need to wear a shirt. But other than that, like, you do you. Awesome. So not everybody has the same trust language, right? And so what do you do when there's a trust mismatch and we're speaking different languages? How how do you adjust to your manager? Or if you're a manager, how do you adjust to the folks on your team? Because you want to get the most out of everybody and you want everybody to feel valued, because replacing people is really expensive and takes a long time, especially in academia.
Yeah, I mean, data shows that $344 billion a year is lost on employee turnover. So that's a lot of money, right? And so I would say it goes back to that question. If you're a manager, for example, and you have a team of a lot of people, you may not have time to speak all 7 languages. But what I will say is, if I knew one of your languages and you're on my team, that's going to create more productivity. It's going to enhance our relationship. So I don't want managers and leaders to think, oh, it's just one more thing I have to do. No, this is imperative, right? This is important because I know my best managers are people that I trusted, and that I don't encourage this, but I would run over hot coals for them. I would work a little extra, right? Because I trusted, because they saw me. And so asking the question, what do you need for me to do your best work while you're here? Right? That's going to again signal to you what their trust language might be. And then if you are trying to figure out or manage up, it's paying attention. It's scheduling meetings, right? During your one-on-ones, you're going to start to listen to what people are saying. They're going to tell you, you're going to find out that, oh, you know what? My prime example, a friend of mine, she started this new job. And when she started the job, she was remote. And then like a couple months later, they said, everybody come on back to the office, right? So she had the furthest commute. It would take her an hour now to get to work. So she was always late, but she was the top performer. And her manager would always be getting on her because she was showing up late. And I told her, I said, can I offer you some feedback? I said, your manager needs you in order to trust you and maybe give you a hybrid schedule. You're going to have to show up. That's what they care about. They don't care about some of these other things, right? And so, again, being in tune, you're going to find out, oh, follow through. When I say I'm going to do something at 5, this is what they value, right? And so, just we need to humanize everybody's experiences and know that we're all in need of something. So, we want to close those gaps.
No, I think that's so important. And I love what you said. My favorite question when I interview people is, how can I support you? And going in knowing, right? Because that tells you a lot about the person, but also it shows, I hope, that you actually do care and they're not just like, punching a clock. But how do you work best? How when you're supported, do you produce your best work? Okay, you kind of alluded to this a little bit. Hybrid work. How is all this exacerbated when some of us are in person, some of us are remote, some of us are kind of in between? How much harder is it to develop that trust, and how do we do it?
Yeah, I think it's made it a little tricky, we can be honest about that. For many reasons, right? If I'm not in the office, you're not seeing my face, then maybe you don't think that you're being thought of for those opportunities, right? Or if I have the camera on or my green light isn't moving, then that is a lot of assumptions. And I think, and I don't have any data to support what I'm about to say, Lisa,
I
but
appreciate the transparency. That's my language.
But I think that since the pandemic, we no longer take things into consideration anymore. We create narratives based on the information that we have, even if it's not the full story, right? And if I fill in the gaps, then it's going to be probably worse than what it could have been had somebody told me. And I think we just automatically assume a worst intent on people, right? Nobody's working, nobody cares, fill in the blanks. And I think that we have to get back to empathy again and humanizing and trusting people again, not just assuming. Or if you had a bad experience at a former place, don't bring that baggage into the next place and now you don't trust anyone, right? Because you might miss out on opportunities where this is a trustworthy environment. But I'll also say that we have to demonstrate. Another trust language is demonstration. Our actions have to continuously show that we are trustworthy. We don't just pop into the room and all of a sudden everybody trusts us. Those where bias comes in, right? And so I think it's important again for us to build relationships. You mentioned it earlier, some of the panelists, is relationally, we need to understand that we all might work at the same place, but we don't experience the workplace the same, right? And once we understand that, then we understand that building trust is different. But I also think you have to have those, and someone said it on the previous panel, those norms, right? When you think about the generational divide inside the workplace, Gen Z is the least trusting of all the generations, whereas boomers are the most trusting of the workplace. And that's because we all have different experiences, right? Boomers entered the workplace where we're happy to have the job, we have good medical, we don't rock the boat. Whereas Gen Z, they're like, we can rock the boat and we will, but we shouldn't look at that as a negative thing, right? There's something that we all can glean from each other. And I think that's part of it, right? Getting to know each other and how we speak to each other. It's not what you say, but how you say it. Instead of demeaning Gen Z because, oh, they want to be the CEO in 24 hours, how do we have a better conversation? I've been here for the last 10 years. I understand how the rules of engagement work. I want to work with you, right? That's going to enhance trust and not erode trust. And I think all of those things are important when we're in a hybrid environment. Is we have to work a little bit harder to get to know people. And again, that's good for business. If I know you and I know what one or two things you need to do your best work, I'm willing to do that, right? And I think that's important. We just have to be willing. It's when we were younger, our parents and guardians used to say, have some manners. And I feel like after COVID, we just threw them out the window and we forget that people are human first and colleagues second.
Yeah, I think all across the board generationally, we threw out those manners. You said something which is interesting, is sometimes it takes people longer to trust than not. And it reminds me of Tina Opie's book, Shared Sisterhood, which we talked about, and we saw Tina earlier. And one of the biggest takeaways I got from that book was white women, this is not like everybody, right? But I totally ascribe to what was said in the book. White women tend to, be more trusting earlier than Black women. And there's a whole history of why and everything else. But and I was like, oh my God, of course, Tina, you're my BFF already. And I've only talked to you for 5 minutes. And she was like, yep, Lisa, yep. And so to me, it was like a big aha moment that, again, we have to meet people where they are. And it might be easier for some of us to get there much faster than others. And that's okay. And we have to have grace and patience to let others come along and prove. Some people are going to require more proof.
Can I add to something you said? Well, shout out to Dr. Tina. It's a great book too. I think culturally speaking, we also have to take into consideration people's trust languages, right? Because for some individuals, we may, fast friends with everybody, right? But think about culturally, some women, men, individuals, they may not be trusting because of history, right? Historically, there's been a lot to be distrustful about, have low trust,
Yeah.
right? So we also have to take into consideration how we're engaging with other people and what trust looks like for other people. I have a chapter in the book about workplace and trust. You think from the Industrial Revolution to, those who experience enslavement, right? Work looks a lot different for everybody. And so we want to also take into account that I might make fast friends with you, but someone who looks like me may take a little more demonstration over time, right? And we got to give people that space to be able to do it and not say, oh, they're aggressive or they're hard to work with, right? And we create these narratives and realizing, again, we all come from different walks of life, and that's being sensitive and empathetic to everybody's experiences. We are bringing our full selves to work, like it or not, right? And we have to consider things a little bit more.
Thank you. Yes, I totally agree. Okay, we just talked about lack of trust for a second. It's all around. You said it. Companies don't trust employees. Employees don't trust companies. You write about trust violations, and you've talked about a couple of them. But can you give us a couple more examples and how they impact different people differently based on their trust languages?
Yeah, again, I don't think anybody goes to work or logs on the computer and says, I'm going to erode trust with so today. I don't think we do that. But again, here's these certain trust violations. If I CC somebody on an email that has no business being CC'd yet, what would it look like? I could have had a conversation with the person, they sit in the cube next to me, but now I've CC'd their manager. What was your intention behind that? Was it, I know that nobody did it because they want to get someone fired, but on the receiving end of that person, when they read that email and see those names, they're going to think and not trust you anymore. Again, we can all show up every day, no matter what we're doing, and ask ourselves this question: is this going to enhance trust or erode trust? Right? And when we take a beat to ask that question, we're going to make less trust violations. So
Hold on, can I pause for 1 second?
Yes.
That should be done before you send any email or any text.
Even if you're using ChatGPT, ask it.
Especially if you're using
Don't just
ChatGPT.
send. Ask, is this going to enhance? If you are the reader, or if I'm the reader receiving this, how am I going to process this, right? Have I earned the right to say this to somebody in this way, right? That requires having trust. The other thing is micromanagement. Micromanagement is the fastest way to erode trust. That's signaling that you don't trust that I can get the work done. That there's a lot of trust issues there. And so I think we can still check in with people and have some meeting norms and one-on-ones, but we don't have to hover over people, right? And make them anxious. And gossip, that is the fastest way to erode. And lastly, favoritism, right? Our go-to people. How does that make everybody else feel, right? You still might have people that you go to get things done, but does everybody on the team know that and know that they're not being considered for that? Think about how that resonates and what trust is doing to the team when we have those things. And again, we've all done it, right? I'm not saying things that none of us have done, but now when we're aware of it, we know better, we do better, right?
Absolutely. And you talked about this a little bit when we were talking about shared sisterhood, um, cultural backgrounds and how that influence the trust languages resonate most strongly for certain individuals. Can you talk a little bit more to tease out other cultures as well?
Yeah, again, I think it's important to think about. Again, we might work at the same places, but we experience that workplace differently. One of the trust languages that I think is so important in this climate, they're all important, but if I were to say what's one that we could really focus on is the language of sensitivity, right? Our actions and our behaviors. I have a lot of leaders when I'm at companies and they'll tell me, "Oh, I don't watch the news anymore. I don't read the news anymore." And I push back on that because yes, you don't want to drown in news that's going to make you anxious and all that, but you have a team that's being impacted around the world. So you need to be understanding and culturally sensitive to what's going on in the world because you're not going to come to work and maybe somebody that's working on your team, their community has been impacted by what's happening, right? If they can't make it that day, or I'm not going to say, oh, let's have that one annual review and your community just experienced a wildfire, right? Or there was a shooting taking place. We need to be understanding of what's going on. If I'm a manager in New York and I have a team lead in LA, if there's a wildfire, I'm not going to say get to the nearest Starbucks so we can get some Wi-Fi so that we can get this done. I'm going to say, are you okay? Get to a safe place. Let's table this, right? But I need to be aware culturally of what's going on. Or if something is impacting my community, but it's not impacting others, again, asking myself, is this the platform? Is this the meeting that I say, let's have a moment of silence for this, or let's do that? Let's think about what we're saying because just because it's impacting me a certain way, it might impact someone else separately. So taking into consideration and being more empathetic to how that is. And I think culturally, we need to be, we're not going to say the joke if we know that last week there was this happening in a certain community. We're going to be more conscious of some of the things, right? And so our impact, our behaviors have an impact, and we don't want to erode that trust, especially if it's hanging on by a thread.
Absolutely. Okay, let's stick with impact.
Yeah.
How can organizations incorporate trust languages into their formal review processes or feedback sessions? What can they actually do? What are like a couple takeaways we can have?
Absolutely. It's fun for me because I get the opportunity to go into a lot of companies and I'm working with a company right now on their, at the top of the year, they start to do their performance reviews. So we're leaning real heavy into feedback because not a lot of managers have been trained to give feedback that enhances trust and doesn't erode trust, right? And so again, I want us to think about when we're having even tough conversations. I'm not saying it's kumbaya all the time. Sometimes we have to have conversations, but am I stripping you away of your humanity? Can I still have my integrity intact when I have this conversation with you, right? Am I giving you this feedback as an opportunity for growth or for you to spiral out the rest of the day, right? And I think that gives people a chance we want to give them feedback because we do want to retain them in most cases, right? And so I think feedback is especially because it can feel like a critique, right? And so we want to make sure, or I know data shows that sometimes when men are managing women, they don't give feedback.
We do a whole session on that. We do multiple sessions on that.
So, and then for Black and brown women, they receive even less feedback. And so you may not want to say the thing, or whether it's good or bad, but you're stripping that person of an opportunity for growth, right? And so getting people in the habit of how do we give feedback, right? And so I think that's something that we all can take into our toolkit. I also created this game called the Trust Catalyst that I play at different companies and organizations to get people, it's industry specific in terms of if you're at a bank, we customize the scenarios based on that so that people, or if you're at an academic institution, we take scenarios that people are dealing with each and every day and we teach them how to use the trust languages, right? Again, we may not all be bilingual in all of them, but if we walk away speaking one or two, we're going to enhance relationships. And lastly, I'm working with another company where I'm training all of their new managers on the 7 trust languages, right? Because think about it, when we were managers, we could have, or future managers, we could use how to engage better with our teams to give and receive feedback and show trust.
No, I think that's so incredible. Thank you. We have like a couple minutes for a couple questions if anyone has any questions. And while I'm looking around, it's interesting. I think that's so important. So I came from the investment banking world, and back in the day, 30 years ago, people were promoted because they were awesome bankers, not because they were great managers. And I think that is changing a little bit now. And so I love that you're going in, especially to these financial institutions. I see one question here. I'm going to give you my mic and then I'm going to repeat it because our online friends don't have a double mic.
Hi, online friends.
Hi, online friends. We never want to break trust, but sometimes things happen. What is the best way to recover from a trust breakage?
Yeah, thank you for that question.
Hold on one second. So the question is, what is the best way to recover from a trust breakage that was not intentional?
Yes. Right, because listen, trust isn't always broken in the grand acts of betrayal, right? If you work anywhere, there are going to be layoffs, there's going to be reorgs, but we still can have humanity and dignity as we relay this information, right? And I think that that's important. If trust can be built or if trust can be broken, I do believe it can be rebuilt, but that's through demonstration. That's through continuous actions, right? And I think that that's what it is. First, taking ownership of where the breakdown happened and allowing people to respectfully let us know that there has been a breakdown, right? I don't have to go to someone and say, I don't trust you anymore, you did that thing. I can just say, you know what, I really value when you give me feedback after a project. I haven't had that in a few months. That would be really helpful to me. That's going to bring them in, right? And have that conversation. But I think many times, especially in leadership, when we do make a mistake or there is an erosion, we won't even admit it. We won't even acknowledge that, based off the information that I had 2 months ago, I made this decision. I want to let you all know with the new information that I have right now, I need to make a different decision. And I apologize if that impacted, right? That feels different than there's smoke coming out of the chimney. You all see it. And I tell you, just go back to work. There's nothing. The alarms are going off. There's nothing to see here. I can still tell you, you know what? I smell it too. I don't know where it's coming from. And, I apologize that I may have not taken it as serious before, but now I'm aware of it and let me find out what's causing it. And I will come back to you, right? And we have to continuously demonstrate. Trust is not a one-time act. It's a lifestyle, right? Just because we trust each other, this is another violation I think is important in the workplace. We'll often say that, oh, well, I've never had that experience with Minda. She's good with me, but somebody else might experience me differently, right? So it's an erosion when I tell them that, no, that's not true. I've never experienced it. Two things can be true at the same time. And I think we have to, again, acknowledgement is the quickest way for us to rebuild those relationships.
I think that's incredible and a great way to end. Trust is not a one-time act. It is a life practice. Thank you, Minda. I highly recommend reading the book now that you have a copy. And it's filled with lots of really fun references for movies from the 80s and 90s, which make it even more enjoyable. So thank you, Minda. This was a pleasure.